When I was in high school, I had a job at a local fast food chain. I worked there for 4 years, freshman year right up until I left for college, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't have some good times there. Holidays are spent together because we don't have much of a choice. Managers who were either good people or just entertaining to work with, coworkers who really became more like friends the longer you were there, and everything in between. I'm not going to say the whole 4 years was great, but it was an experience that I wouldn't trade for anything. Hell, I think everyone should have to work fast food for at least a few months. Gives you a little bit of perception on the guy behind the counter. The chain I worked for was unique in many ways. They were one of the few who let people host events in the lobby. We had a small concert there once for a local metal band, which made for some entertaining times. We had a policy to hire 14-year-olds under special circumstances, which got us into trouble more than once, due to 14-year-old girls flirting with much older guys. This led to allegations of underage hookups in the back room. They had a weird rehabilitated cons program that hired ex-cons fresh from prison too. That one worked really well with the aforementioned hiring 14-year-olds policy, and also led to a couple of guys robbing the store after getting off shift. I don't even think they bothered to take their name tags off, so they were pretty easy to catch. One of my favorites, though, was our 24-hour program, which ran pretty much every summer that I worked there. You see, since I was under 18, I wasn't allowed to work past 10 on a school night, but during the summer, I could work as late or as early as I wanted, and I took full advantage of this to fill my pockets with cash. As you may have guessed, this program added a third shift to the usual 2-shift schedule, and it was a 12-hour shift to boot. You'd come in at 6 p.m., just as the dinner rush was ramping up, and work until 6 a.m. when the openers were coming in for their second cup of coffee. The hours were shit, and the pay still wasn't great. No pay differential for late shifts. But what made it worthwhile was the 4-hour lull in between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. You might have to churn out some cheeseburgers or chicken nuggets for a bunch of drunk college kids, or a carload of stoners who might wander in wanting nuggets, but for the most part, you just kept the store clean and kinda hung out. It was usually a light crew too, and on the night the story takes place, I had a good bunch of guys with me. I'd gotten my friend a job there that year. We'll call him Ryan, cause he might read this. He and Trevor were on the grill that night. I was running the drive-thru window, and my favorite manager was watching the store, a guy named Joseph. Joseph was one of those rare managers that didn't have his head crammed up his ass, and gave just enough of a shit to fly under the radar. He was a cool guy. I sometimes wonder whatever happened to him. Anyway, it had been a long night to say the least. The dinner rush was particularly bad, so as it starts to die down, we picked over the old food in the warming box and went to the break room to hang out. Some managers frowned on this, some would even write you up for it, but Joseph was cool and genuinely liked most of us. The lobby doors were locked at midnight to keep the weirdos out, and with the headset turned up so I could hear if a car rolled into the drive-thru, we started eating old cheeseburgers and swapping stories. The stories started pretty blandly. This thing that happened or that thing that someone had heard about, but finally we fell into creepy stories about stuff we had experienced. I told them about the weirdo in our parking lot a few years ago who'd creeped a bunch of people out before the cops arrived. They found his wife's head in the passenger seat, along with a giant bloody machete. We thought he meant to rob or murder us, but it turns out he was just having a nervous breakdown in our parking lot after offing his old lady. Trevor tried to top it with a story about the time he'd been drinking with his cousin out in a cornfield, but none of us believed him. He said the old farmer had come out in the cornfield, slasher flick style, and screamed at them to get off his property while chasing them with a pitchfork. We piled in the truck and sped off, but something hit the back tailgate hard. Well, we didn't stop till we got to my cousin's house, and what we saw when we got out was the last thing we expected. He paused for dramatic effect. "What was it?" said Ryan, after Trevor had milked it for a little too long. "A pitchfork. The guy had thrown a pitchfork and stuck it right in the tailgate of the truck. If it had been a little higher, it would have come through the back rear glass and took all three of us right in the back of the head." He paused again like this should have been a dramatic revelation, but Ryan and I both shared a look like we doubted most of this had actually happened. When Joseph spoke up from the doorway, all three of us jumped. He'd been counting down the safe, so he hadn't been there for the start of the spooky stories. But it appeared he had come in just in time to catch the tail end of Trevor's story. Joseph was older than all three of us, a guy in his 30s with a wife and kids, and we often forgot that when we were hanging out because of how naturally he related to us. He was an avid gamer who did all the cool stuff we all hoped we'd be doing when we were adults. Right then, though, he had a decidedly dad look on his face as he addressed our little gathering of storytellers. "I've got a story for you guys," he said, spinning a chair around and sitting in it with his arms folded over the back. "And it's a true story, too. You want to hear it?" We did, and he began. I was working at the downtown store at the time, living in this dingy little apartment with my wife. We were broke, and she was pregnant and out on maternity leave. I was finishing up my bachelor's degree during the day, so nights were all I could count on to pay the bills. This was before the owner started up the third shift, or I'd have been all over that. So there I was, working the 3 to 11 shift, busting my hump, and we had a real hard-ass manager who kept us late almost every night, usually unpaid overtime since we couldn't clean it right the first time apparently. So most nights, I was lucky to get out of there about 12:30. The night in question had been especially bad, and I didn't get permission to leave until almost 1 in the morning. It was Friday night, though, so I knew I could sleep up until shift tomorrow if I needed to. Picking up my bag, I started trudging home through the chilly January air. Now, I know it rarely gets cold here, being Florida and all, but that winter had been particularly bad. They had all talked about snow more than once, and it had obliged us by dumping a semi-solid sheet of slush all over the place the night before. Most of it was off the road, but the wind was howling at me as I pulled my coat tight and walked up the deserted center of the road. Now, downtown is usually party central, unless you feel like driving to the beach, but tonight it was so cold that even the bars and coffee shops and all-night diners had shuttered their faces and gone to bed. The streetlights were on, and the sewer grates were belching steam up into the cold night. The whole scene looked pretty creepy to me. So, I'm walking up the center of the road, and there's a damn good reason I'm doing that too, in case you were wondering. I was made aware of Stephen King's It from a very young age, and it had given me a real phobia about sewer drains. I didn't want to walk too close because, even with all that hard-won 23 years of wisdom I had, I just knew that on a cold, lonely night like tonight, I would get a taloned hand around my ankle and a quick trip into the sewer if I stepped too close to those smoking holes. So I walked right up the center of the street, as far from the grates as I could, and that particular night, it led me into trouble. So I'm walking up the center line, boots clomping on the asphalt, as I made my way through this way too quiet street. That's when I heard a noise. I thought at first it was the sound of steam escaping the grates. It was a hissing noise, after all, but when it came again, I heard it for what it was. You remember in grade school when some kid behind you wants to pass a note, so he makes that psst sound at you to get your attention? Well, that's what this sound was, a psst sound from the left side of the road. So I turn around, but I don't see anyone. I start walking again, and that same psst sound comes again from the left side of the road. I squinted at the dark alley between two buildings, getting ready to start flying if someone comes running out to mug me. But it's empty. That's when I heard it again. This time, somebody says something in a low voice, too. It sounds like, "Psst, hey buddy," followed by that sound again, "Psst, psst." Then I look down, and, I kid you not, there is a face in the drainage grate. As the steam comes curling up around it, I see a midnight black face looking out at me, and the only thing I can make out is its eyes, and they look fucking huge. I booked it. I start running, but as I run, I hear the voice behind me, shouting for me to come back. Then I realize the voice isn't behind me anymore. I glance to my left, and I see that it's following me from the openings of the sewer grates. Loud feet are slapping on the stone down there, and he's trying to get my attention. That's when I hear him yell real loud and fall with a watery splash. I didn't slow down in the least bit, but I saw the black ice a little too late when I turned back around. I hit it. My feet shot straight up and out from under me. I fell back hard against the pavement, and I was pretty sure I had broken my elbow when I came down hard on the concrete. At the time, I was trying to make my head stop spinning as the black spots danced around. I struggled up to my elbow, wincing as I got up on my hurt one, just as the spots started to go away. That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. "What?" I asked, unable to help myself, wrapped up so deeply until at that moment I had barely realized I was breathing. The manhole cover, not 5 feet away, was coming up, and the face is looking out at me. I tried to get up, and I slipped again as this dripping, oozing thing climbed out of the opening. He towers over me from my prone position, and I start pushing with my legs as I slide away from him. He comes out oozing and quivering from the dark tunnel, and in my mind, he is the apotheosis of every shadowy creature from every horror movie I have ever seen. He is the creature from the Black Lagoon. He is it, the blob, and he's coming to drag me back down into the darkness so he can slowly devour me. His foot slaps down hard on the concrete as he menaces towards me. I'm still trying to slide away on my butt, my elbow starting to cry out now, and when my low back hits the curve, I just froze there as this creature from the midnight cinema towers over me, its oozing flesh dripping onto the concrete. It takes large, ponderous steps as it moves in on me, and at this point, I'm so gripped with fear I can't even move. Its flesh falls to the ground in gooey plops, and after 1,000,000 years crammed into 5 seconds, it's standing not 3 feet away from me. It bends its mountainous head down towards me, and in a gravelly voice, it says the last 3 words I figured I would ever hear, and they're the last 3 words I ever expected to hear from a creature like this. At this point, he looks at us, his mask of pent-up terror melting into a creepy smile, the creepiest smile I've ever seen, as he gravels out, "Got a light?" We sat, dumbfounded, for nearly 15 seconds before Trevor sputters, "What?" Joseph laughs. He asked if I had a light. It turns out he was a homeless guy who'd been living in the sewers to stay warm. He had gotten himself a pry bar so he could hook it under the lid, and he'd been staying in the sewers at night where it was warm. He had no clue why it was so steamy down there, but it was a great place to sleep, when the alternative was freezing your ass off in the park, or down by the pier with the other vags. When I asked him why he was covered in what I hoped was mud, he said that he'd been chasing after me, trying to get a lighter to spark a cigarette. Then he'd fallen in a muddy slush puddle and gotten covered in the stuff. I laughed and handed him the lighter out of my bag, an old Zippo my old man had given me, and considered it a fair trade for a great story. I've told that story so many times over the years, and it never gets old. We laughed about that story and Joseph's deadpan way of building it up right until the very end, for years to come. I've begged him to retell it 150 times, and it never gets old. So if you're ever downtown on a cold night and someone tries to get your attention from the closest sewer grate, just remember that it's probably some vagrant trying to stay warm and have a smoke. And if they drag you down into the sewer for a slow process of digestion, then I guess I was wrong, wasn't I? It was a fight like any of the others we had recently had. Little did I know, it would be the last fight we ever had, though. Our fight was about grades. They all seemed to be about grades at that time. He'd been heading out the door, dressed to go hang out in the woods with his little hoodlums he called friends. I suspected they were drinking, and I was absolutely sure they were out there smoking. I was tired of cleaning up after him and watching him slip slowly into delinquency. He told me he'd be back, and I told him to stop and come have a seat instead. He glowered at me from the door, knowing what I wanted to talk about, and not liking it. He slammed the door and came to sit on the couch, knowing he was about to sit down for another ass chewing. His grades had come in, and they were the worst they had ever been. When I told him this, he said it wasn't his fault. I sighed. It was never his fault. Nothing was ever his fault. There was always someone else to blame, someone else to point the finger at, and it was never up to him to take responsibility. This was old ground. We retread it for the 1,000th time, it seemed. He would have to repeat the 11th grade at this rate. He said he didn't care. He would have to quit his job if he couldn't keep his grades up. He didn't care about that either. I would snatch everything but his air, his car, his games, his computer, everything that mattered to him, and he would be stuck with nothing but studying. And that was the stroke that finally got through to him. Mom never had to stoop to this. Mom always knew there was a better way than to just punish me all the time. He said exactly what he knew I needed to hear to lose my temper. Well, she isn't here, is she, Marcus? She's dead. Or have you forgotten? I could see by his pained expression that I'd touched a nerve. How could either of us forget that little fact? It just hadn't felt like home here without her. We had done a lot of fighting, staying cooped up in our rooms, and not a lot of talking about the hurt we both felt at her passing. She had always kept us from escalating to this level of arguments that would quickly come to the cusp of violence, I was starting to believe. My wife had been the pillar that held our relationship up. My wife had been dead for almost a year now, and it had been the worst year of my life. She died very suddenly, painlessly, the EMTs told me. She had been turning into the grocery store to get our weekly shopping list done when a bus had struck her car. Her car had rolled 4 times before coming to rest against a tree, and the impact had killed her even as it smashed in the doors of the car. I can remember when I'd gotten the phone call, sitting at my desk and preparing to file some reports. I had given bad news to spouses like this 1,000 times when I was on the force, but it's different when that kind of horror visits you personally. We buried her in the family plot, and the 2 of us had gone home to try and make the most of the house we had left. We had fought bitterly nearly every day since. I saw Marcus tear up and turn away before he could see my eyes filling up as well. I hate you. Sometimes I wish I'd been in that car with her. That took me back a moment, and I answered out of anger before I could stop myself. Sometimes, son, I wish you had too. We were silent for a solid minute before he got up and walked slowly towards the hallway. Then don't bother worrying about me anymore. Maybe I'll go talk to Mom, see if she wants to listen. Then he stomped down the hallway and slammed his door behind himself, leaving me alone to feel like a shitty parent and the worst person alive. I spent the next few hours bustling about to distract myself. I made dinner, folded some laundry, and generally picked up while dinner boiled and simmered. When it finally finished, I assembled it on a plate and took it to the door of his room, intending it to be a peace offering. Marcus. I called his name softly, knocking on the door and leaning in to listen. The other side of the door was quiet, not a sound to be heard, but I thought I could hear the creak of the mattress as its occupant rolled over. I sighed. He was ignoring me. That made me angry. I was trying to extend an olive branch, and here he was ignoring me. Well, dinner's in the fridge when you decide to stop being mad, I said. His dinner went into the fridge, and I decided to flip on my Xbox and try to block out his childish behavior. I was still playing later when I heard the door creak open and the light footsteps he always used when he was trying to sneak out of his room. I ignored him as he scuttled up the hallway, clearly checking to see if I was in the living room. It had gotten dark a few hours ago. A check of the time showed me it was 10 o'clock, and I was a little angry that he was still awake. As he crossed behind the couch, I told him to get his food and go to bed. You don't need to stay up all night. He didn't say anything. He just scuttled off to his room and closed the door. I went back to playing my game, and about an hour later I took myself off to bed. I locked my door, just in case, but I wasn't expecting any trouble. My son was a hothead, just like his old man, but he wasn't usually violent. He was a good kid, but it was hard to see the good under all that yelling. I wish now that I had looked harder. Maybe I could have prevented what came next. The next day was Saturday, and I spent the day cleaning and catching up on things. I didn't see my son all day. He didn't come out for meals or just to ask me if he could have any of the myriad of things returned for the weekend. This wasn't out of the ordinary for him. Last summer, he would just stay up all night, and we'd never see him until morning, or the few times he got a wild hair to wake up early. After last night, I was a little glad he didn't come out. Truth be told, I didn't really want to see him, and his silence was kind of nice. When noon rolled around and I hadn't heard the flush of a toilet or the footsteps across the floor, I became a little concerned. I went to his door and knocked, calling his name, expecting to hear some response. There was nothing, not a sound from inside, and I started to feel angry again. I remembered how he had iced me out the night before, and left without saying anything. If he wanted to play the silent treatment game, so could I. I didn't think about it again until I was getting ready for bed, his door still not having rattled all day. I showered, took my sleep aid, and went to bed. Getting comfy down under the covers, I started to think that maybe I should be more concerned. Was he sick? Hurt? Perhaps he was waiting for me to apologize so he could get back on even footing. I got half out of bed before my anger flared up again. He just wanted me to be the first one to crack. I rolled back in bed, putting the pillow over my head as I tried to fall asleep. I wasn't going to play these games with him. I was not going to be the first one to crack. I awoke in the middle of the night to a loud crashing noise in the kitchen. I was next to the bed in a heartbeat, police training taking over, finding the box that held my handgun. I crept towards the bedroom door, quiet as a mouse, as the destruction continued to cascade around the kitchen. I wrapped my hand around the doorknob, just as a sound like a stove tipping over crunched across the house. I winced, wondering who the hell was making such a ruckus in my kitchen. It had to be some meth head or something. No burglar would be this incompetent. I opened the door quietly and tiptoed through the living room, boxer shorts being my only covering. The noise had stopped after the loud crash, but I was taking no chances. The last thing I wanted to do was get jumped on as I came around the corner, and I kept my gun up and at the ready. When I peeked around the edge of the bar, I could see a huge mess spreading across the usually pristine kitchen. The refrigerator doors were open, food and juice spilling everywhere, and the stove was indeed flipped onto its face as it lay on the floor. Bakelite glass was scattered across the ground and added to the overall catastrophe that had stretched across the kitchen. Of my intruder, however, there was no sign. I searched across the house and found no one. The door was locked, front and back, and none of the windows were open. It was pretty clear that no one had broken in to trash my kitchen, and I could feel my anger flare up again as I looked at the disaster. Only one person could have been responsible for this, and he was currently pretending I didn't exist. This time I hammered on the door. "What the hell? You ruined my kitchen, wasted my food, and just scuttle back off to your hole? Get your ass out here and help me clean this shit up." No sound came from inside. I was furious. Did he think he could just wreck the house and then ignore me? Who the hell did he think he was? He was on thin ice, and if this was how he wanted to act, I would be suggesting to his grandmother tomorrow that maybe he ought to go live with her for a while. He was 17 after all, and if he wanted to act like an idiot, I was tempted to call the police. Let him spend a night in jail if that's how he wanted to act. I threw the door open then, and there he was, lying with his back to me under his heavy comforter. "Get your ass up. You can help me clean up this mess, and then we can have a long talk about why you think it's okay to destroy my kitchen." He lay still, ignoring me, giving me the literal cold shoulder. I took a step into his room, fists balled up as I prepared to turn him over roughly and shout at him until he decided to listen. I stopped myself, though, after that first step. Maybe this was what he wanted. If I had considered that the police might solve my problem for me, then surely he had as well. He was hoping I would get rough with him so he could get me in trouble. Well, I was not about to play right into his hands. I grabbed the chair from beside his door and wedged it up under the doorknob as I closed it behind myself. Good luck wrecking the place now, asshole. I didn't sleep that night. I cleaned the kitchen before dragging myself back to bed just as the sun came up. I was filthy, sweaty, and smelled strongly of pine sol. The kitchen had taken a lot of work, and I fell into a filthy, thin sleep as I lay in my bed. My dreams were full of wrecked kitchens, thankless children, and lots of screaming. I slept poorly despite my tiredness and woke up grumpy and sore. I saw that the chair was still there as I walked to the bathroom and sniffed. He probably could have opened that door, but it would have taken a lot of shoving. Likely his activities from the night before had taken a lot out of him, and now he was too tired to get up. Oh well, I thought. He'll get hungry sometime, and then he'll have to come out and talk to me. I showered, ate a late breakfast, and busied myself with the rest of the day. I kept listening for him, expecting him to curse as he discovered the chair I'd pushed under his door, or flush a toilet, but he never made a peep. His room was as quiet as a tomb, and he never so much as turned on the TV or walked to the bathroom. That should have raised a red flag with me, but I was still so mad from the night before. If he wanted to starve in there, let him do it, I suppose. I left him alone, and when it was time for bed, I crawled in gladly and was snoozing about the time my head hit the pillow. I heard the chair scrape harshly across the floor about 11, and I climbed out of bed to go catch him leaving his room as the sounds became harsher still. I got about halfway across the bedroom when something hit my door hard enough to rattle it in its frame. I took a step back, startled, waiting to see if he would knock it down or simply keep battering at it. After the sounds of breaking wood rattled across the room, I realized the something was the chair I had put under my son's door. After the chair shattered, he started battering the door with his fists, and I reached for the handgun on my nightstand even as I reached for the phone on my charger. I dialed 911 and laid the phone against my ear, pointing the gun at the door steadily. I don't want to shoot my son, but if he came in meaning to harm me, I would do what I had to do. The operator picked up on the second ring. 911, what is your emergency? I told them that I needed some officers to come to my address. I told them that my son was acting violently, possibly under the influence, and I desperately needed help. The operator could hear the sounds of someone trying to batter my door in and said that she would dispatch help right away. She told me to stay on the line, and I did just that. My aim shook a little as something put a fist-sized hole in my door. The frame shook and the surface bulged as whatever was trying to break in tore through the first layer of the door and into the interior. I haven't prayed since my wife died, but I prayed then that whatever God resided over all wouldn't make me shoot this child I had raised. I saw something crawl through the hole in the blackness of the dark room and reach for the doorknob. I leveled my gun and prepared to fire if the door opened. It slid around the knob, and I heard it twist just before the lock caught. Thankfully, I had remembered to lock the door. It had fumbled at the simple turn lock when the first blue and whites flashed through the windows. The black thing retreated then, and the silence that followed it was almost deafening. I snuck across the room to the door, gun leading as I peeked out into the hallway. The shadowy hall was empty, the door to the living room closed, and I shoved the door open noisily as it hung broken on the hinges. The police were banging on the door, calling to see if someone would let them in. I put the gun on the bookshelf by my door, not wanting to get shot myself, and I called to them to tell them that I was the caller and I was opening the door. The door came open, and they had their hands on their holsters, waiting to see who would open the door. They took in my boxer shorts and my scared face and asked me what had happened. I told them everything. I told them about the fight I'd had with my son. I told them about how he'd been in his room for days on end, only coming out at night to eat or cause trouble. I told them about the mess in the kitchen, even showing them some pictures I'd taken on my phone. I told them about the silent treatment we'd been engaged in for the last few days, and how tonight had simply been the icing on the cake. They agreed to come with me to talk to him. I knocked on the door, already knowing what I'd find. There was no response. The cops looked at me skeptically, but I told them this was just how he'd been lately. I opened the door to find him turned away from the door, blankets pulled up over himself, the same way he had been the last time I tried to talk to him. Marcus, you need to stop playing games and talk to these men. You went too far. My door is destroyed. You need to get up and tell them what you did. Marcus said nothing. That's when my temper flared again, and I strode forward to yank the blankets off the bed. Get the hell up. Stop being such a child. I know you can... When the blankets came off, I saw the dried blood soaked into the mattress. It had pooled on the floor beside the bed, and Marcus lay on his side as his eyes stared sightlessly at the wall. His body had begun to bloat, the skin blackening, and his wrists were jagged rips up his arm. The knife he had used was still clutched in his hand, and the blade was dark with dried blood. I spent several hours in the police station, shaking and trying to come to terms with what had happened. The cops hadn't put me in handcuffs. Professional courtesy, I guess. But they had implied that they suspected this wasn't as cut and dry as it looked. I suspected that they thought I had attempted to cover up a murder, but when the coroner's report came back, they determined that he'd been dead for a few days. The going consensus was he had killed himself after our last fight. They found a note on his desk, and if they hadn't already thought I was a shitty parent, that certainly sealed it. Not only had I essentially let my son kill himself and ignored him for the next 2 days, but I had driven him to it as well. The note he'd left said, "If you wish I had died in that crash so much, then let me just give you what you want. I'll be sure to tell Mom why I'm here so soon. They cut me loose an hour ago, but all I can do is sit in my car and shake. Part of it's grief. I can't believe I have to go back to that empty house by myself. I can't believe we'll never be able to put all this behind us and move on. I can't believe I'll never get to see him grow up, have kids of his own. I've lost everything now. My son, my wife, everything that made my house a home. But I'd be lying if I said that it wasn't fear as well. Because if my son was dead, what was the thing that destroyed my kitchen and came after me tonight? It passed within a few inches of me on that first night, and thinking back on that makes me shiver. The cops ignored me when I asked what I was supposed to do about whatever attacked me tonight. I know they think I'm making it up, trying to garner some kind of sympathy for my negligence, but I know what I saw. I saw that long, shadowy arm creep into the hole in my door. If it wasn't my son, then what the hell was that? As I sit in my car writing this, I don't know if I'll ever go home again. I don't even know if I have a home anymore. I've been living rough for about a year now. It's not as bad as you'd think. Not really. When COVID hit, I lost my job. The food industry got hit pretty hard, and the catering business I worked for had suddenly closed up shop. When I couldn't pay my rent, my landlord put me on the street. I suppose I could have gone and gotten an assistance check, but I met some guys at a soup kitchen I was crashing at, and they invited me to come live rough with them. For the last 9 months, I've been traveling from town to town with a great group of guys who've been homeless for years. I know this makes me sound like a tourist, but it's really not as bad as you'd think. I've been enjoying a freer lifestyle than I ever had before. I travel around with 4 guys, and they keep an eye on me, and I keep an eye on them. They call me Kid, and I'm lucky to have fallen in with them, all things told. Travis is a vet from Iraq who couldn't seem to live in an apartment after spending 6 months in an Iraqi prison. He's a rough guy, but very protective of his squad, which I guess is us now. Conley is more like a classic tramp. He's old enough to be my granddad and seems to get by mostly on panhandling. He can be real charming, and he's amiable enough, whether he's drunk or sober. He's more than happy to share what he makes with the rest of us, too. Then, of course, there's John. Of the 3, I think John is the one I like the best. He reminds me of my dad somehow. He's tall and thin with bushy eyebrows and a thick salt and pepper beard. He works as a handyman sometimes to make money, and he seems more than content to keep a protective eye on all of us. Despite Conley being 15 years older than him, you can tell that he thinks of all of us as his kids. He was very protective of us, and I spent many nights around a campfire with the 3 of them. John was always at the head of the fire, like a father at his table, and we often told stories as we hunkered around our camp. On the night in question, we were telling scary stories. We had camped in the woods off the interstate, far enough in that our fire couldn't be seen from the road, and we were eating food we had all bought and telling tales. Conley was talking about a ghost story he had heard in Denver, and Travis told us about a ghost soldier spotted around the barracks he was assigned to in Iraq. I told one of my many creepypastas I'd read during my other life, and finally we looked at John. John was eating quietly through it all, and now seemed intent on continuing his dinner. "Your turn, Dad," I said, using the teasing nickname I had fixed on him. "Don't really like to tell stories," he said, and his voice had a hollow tone to it as he busied himself with his can of stew. "Come on, John," said Conley, already sounding like his dinner was affecting him. "We all told a story. Now it's your turn." I was sitting next to John at his right hand, and I saw him darken a little as Conley prodded at him. "Easy, Conley. If John doesn't want to tell a story, then he doesn't have to." "Fine. You guys want a story? I got a story for you." John sounded a little mad, and Conley raised his hands in a placating way as he told him it was fine. "It's a great story. I think you'll love it. Gather up, kids. It's a real doozy." He reached over and took the bottle of rot gut from Conley, taking a deep swig before he started. He sounded flustered, out of sorts, and I kind of didn't want him to tell it now. Clearly something was going on here that was outside the norm, and I was afraid of what might happen after his story was told. Want it or not, though, John began. "It was midnight, just like tonight. The August wind was creeping in from the east, cold and hungry, as the two boys sat around their campfire, munching their dinner of beans. They didn't have the luxury of a home or a hearth, only having the other in this world. Their parents had cast them out, not having enough money to feed them any longer, and the two boys had been riding the rails, seeking their fortunes as they tried to make it day by day. The two boys had managed to beg enough for a can of beans, and as they sat around the fire, they listened to the bubbling inside as their stomachs growled and their mouths watered. They hadn't eaten in 3 days, you see, and the smell of them beans was enough to make them ravenous. They sat closer to the fire, basking in the smell of the cooking beans, and that's when they heard the cry. The two huddled close to the fire, shuddering as the howl glided up between the trees. Their campfire wavered under the torrent of wind, and they hunkered close as they tried to keep alive. They blocked it with their bodies, feeling the icy bite of the wind as they tried to cook their dinner. The howl growled across their shivering skin, and the two boys wondered if that would be their last meal. The beans began to boil over the lip of the can, and the older boy's threadbare glove to allow him to slide it from the flames. He poured the beans into a tin cup for his brother, gritting his teeth as the heat became too hot even for his gloved hand. As he poured, he could feel something stalking behind them. It had smelled their food and came to look. If they were lucky, it was just a little cat or a mangy dog that would leave if they shouted. If they weren't, then the older boy would stand against it while the brother ran. Either way, the two would eat a few mouthfuls of beans before they died. He wrapped his scarf around the can gingerly, holding it by the tatted garment as he tipped the scalding beans into his mouth. They burned his tongue and blistered his throat, but his hunger was too great to wait. His brother moaned in pain as he did the same, the two of them feeding their bodies as the scalding food nourished them. And all the while, the beast howled and stalked behind them. Neither boy looked into the dark woods. They knew that something stalked them, that something wanted them desperately, but they thought that if they ignored it, it might just pass them by. As it moved around them, the oldest could see that it was like a dog. It capered about on all fours, its teeth bone white as it grinned at them. It stalked their little fire, circling the pair 3 times before stopping. It stood between the two, its arrow-shaped head pushed in close. The two boys ate, trying to ignore it, not wanting to see it and hoping it would just go away. When it spoke, the younger of the two began to cry in terror.
You come into my woods, bring your destructive fire, and then you don't even offer me a proper gift. What rude children you are. I should punish you for such insolence.
The boys begged the creature, saying they had nothing to give, but the creature only scoffed.
You should have thought of that before entering my woods.
The two boys begged him for mercy, to take pity on 2 starving children.
Mercy is not a trait I ever saw a need to learn. Those who enter my realm bring me gifts. You will present me with a gift, or you will suffer my wrath.
He spoke with a sense of refinement that was at odds with his monstrous nature. The boys had still not summoned up the courage to look at him, and now they shuddered against each other as they thought of what to do. The oldest looked at his still warm can of beans in his hand and saw that he had 2, possibly 3 bites of beans left. He held them out to the creature, still not looking at him, and hoped it would be enough. The creature approached, sniffing at the can, and a weight slid into the warm vessel. It slurped as its long tongue lapped at the beans, smacking as it tasted the juice and liking what it found.
Lovely.
The creature purred, turning its head towards the younger, who had begun to shake.
And you? Share with me what is in your cup, little one, and you might be allowed to live through the night.
The youngest had his hand over the mouth of his cup, unwilling to move it. His brother told him to give the creature a taste. Then they could leave this place and never come back. The youngest boy shook his head again. The creature put his face very close to the boy and demanded that he remove his hand in a low growl. The boy's shaking hand slid from the cup opening, and the brother felt his stomach drop. The younger boy had wolfed his beans, eating them all, and had nothing to show but a cup of juice residue. The older boy could see his tears cutting lines down his dirty face, leaving trails of pink against his skin. He started apologizing, hastily and low, to the older boy, saying he just couldn't help himself. As the creature asked for his due, the younger could only hold out his shaking, empty cup for the beast to inspect. The tongue slid into the metal, making a soupy, gloopy noise as the creature searched for food. And as it slid out, the two heard the creature tutting in disappointment.
What a shame.
Suddenly, the warmth of the brother's forehead was gone, and the forest was filled with the sounds of his younger brother screaming. The older brother curled into a ball, shuddering and weeping as he heard his brother torn to pieces. He closed his eyes and begged God to make it over, but it was some time before the forest was quiet again. He lay there listening to the wind howl, his campfire guttering out as he shivered in the dark, alone. The three of us sat speechless, looking at John as the campfire crackled before him. Out in the woods, an animal loosed a long, mournful howl, and Conley suddenly decided to sleep under the nearby overpass. "It's chilly, but at least I won't get ate up by no beast." Travis agreed, and the two grabbed their stuff and moved on. "Better go join them," John said, poking at the fire as he looked into the flames. "Sounds like an old friend is looking for his due." I heard something in his words I didn't like, something akin to a suicidal friend telling you it's fine to leave them alone. But I got up and followed the others anyway. The last time I saw John, he was still staring into the flames. We looked for him the next day, but he was nowhere to be found. We found the old campsite. We found his pack. But of John, there was no sign. By midday, we just assumed he had left, and we moved on. I'm still not entirely sure what happened to him, but if you meet John on the road somewhere, tell him his troop misses him. And if you meet the creature from his story, I hope you saved it some beans. Otherwise, you might discover what really happened to John on that windy December night by the interstate. I didn't want the sweater in the first place. From the first time I laid eyes on the damn thing, I knew it would haunt me until the day I died. I first saw it in a thrift store window when I was 10 years old. It was a lumpy green thing made out of thick yarn, an ugly monstrosity that looked like someone's grandmother had knitted badly. As much as I hated it, I was also drawn to it. Even as I stared, I thought I could see a pair of big, goggly eyes in the pattern. Two sharp teeth floating amongst the swirls of thread seemed eager to bite me as I slid it on. The arms ended in little tassels that looked like claws, sharp claws that looked like needles. I hated it, but I was drawn to it in that way that children are drawn to anything that might end their perceived immortality. Mom must have noticed my interest. 2 weeks later, just as the autumn chill began to rise, she gave it to me one morning so I could wear it to school. She pulled it out from behind her back, flourishing it like the end of some magic trick. She smiled hugely, clearly thinking she had something I really wanted. My stomach dropped when I saw it, and I was again filled with a sense of dread that she must have picked up on. "It's the sweater you liked so much," she said, looking a little hurt. "You really seemed taken with it when you saw it back at the store." Mom didn't have the money to buy me much. Dad had left when I was a baby, and she worked as a waitress to put food on the table and a roof over my head. We didn't have a lot of money for presents, and I could tell that however much this sweater had cost was too much for me to act anything but grateful. I pulled it on, not really wanting it on my skin, but pretending it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. It was made out of scratchy wool that I just knew at first glance would make me feel too warm. It rubbed at my skin like steel wool as it settled on my arms. It just felt wrong as it sat against my smooth skin, and I immediately wanted to take it off. It felt like there were bugs in it. As I walked to the door, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe roaches or earwigs had gotten into the fabric. She walked me to the bus stop, all the while smiling at me as I pretended the sweater wasn't the worst thing I'd ever worn. As the bus pulled away from the curve, I yanked it off and stuffed it in my backpack. My friend Mark looked at me strangely. "New sweater?" "Mom found it for me, but it's just about the most uncomfortable sweater ever." "I thought it looked kinda cool," Mark said, "like Slimer from the Ghostbusters." The movies were pretty popular around this time, and I had to admit that it did look pretty ghoulish. The pattern on the front, big teeth and bug eyes, did make it look a little like the green ghost from the movie, and we talked about it all the way to school. I forgot all about the sweater until I got home that afternoon. I found it crumpled at the bottom of my backpack when I got started on my homework. I took it out and laid it over my desk chair. As I sat to do my homework, though, it began to itch at me. I took it and tossed it in a chair by the closet door instead, getting back to work. Even having it against my skin made me feel weird, and I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder at it as I did my homework. It felt like it was looking at me somehow, staring at me with those huge bug eyes, and I felt haunted by it as it sat placidly. When Mom came home a few hours later, she seemed happy to see the sweater. "I knew you would like it. Was it warm enough today?" "Yeah, it was just right," I lied. I finished my homework and went downstairs to help with dinner. Typically, I would have sat in my room or watched television till dinner was made, but tonight, I just wanted an excuse to be out of my room, away from the sweater. My room felt invaded every time I looked at it, and I just wanted to be anywhere but there for a few hours. I didn't think about it again until it was time for bed. I came into my room, pajama bottoms and white undershirt on, with my mouth still feeling minty from the toothpaste. I was ready to climb into bed when I saw the sweater again. For some reason, I just couldn't stand looking at it anymore. I picked it up, the coarse fabric scritching at my hands, and tossed it under the bed. I knew it meant nothing, a meaningless gesture, but I didn't want it watching me while I slept. Mom came in and kissed my forehead. "Good night, honey," she said as she turned off the lights and closed the door. I burrowed down under the covers and started getting comfortably sleepy. It had been a long day, with another one to follow, and as I began to edge towards sleep, I started to hear a weird noise from somewhere in the room. It sounded like someone dragging wire across the hardwood, and as I focused my attention on it, I could hear the sound sliding across the boards. I sat in my bed and looked for it, that harsh slithering that wound its way over the flooring. As I cast my eyes over by the chair, I saw the source of the noise. It was the sweater. It was sitting on the chair where I had thrown it earlier, leering at me with its toothy grin. It couldn't be there. I had thrown it under the bed. But there it sat, as though I'd never grabbed it in the first place. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe I hadn't thrown it. Maybe I'd just imagined the whole thing, and now I was just scaring myself. I rolled over and tried to get back to sleep. As I tossed and turned, though, I could almost feel those bug eyes looking at me. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to block it all out. As I lay there, I imagined I could hear that wire dragging across the wood again. It was like the scratching of claws times 10, and I could hear it going under my bed and towards the wall. I peeked out from under the covers and looked towards the chair. making sure that hideous sweater was still there and not responsible for the noises. The chair was empty, though. I sat straight up and peered around the semi-dark, searching for the sweater. It couldn't have moved. It was a sweater, a stupid sweater, and even my 10-year-old brain knew the sweater didn't just get up and move around on its own. I looked over the edge of the bed, seeing nothing, and hesitantly hung upside down so I could glance under the bed. In my 10-year-old brain, that was where the monsters lived, and this sweater had become a monster now. I peeked, afraid to see it, but it wasn't there. Only a few toys and some dirty clothes greeted me. I looked back at the chair, still finding it empty, and snuggled down under the covers so I could get some sleep. I awoke in the morning to a terrible pain in my arm. The sweater was in bed with me, curled around my arm as though it had gotten tangled on me in the night, and I wrenched it off violently. I didn't want it to touch me. I didn't want it to contact my skin. As I came free, I saw the source of the pain. On my forearm, on the inside of my arm, was what looked like a bite. As I inspected it in the dewy morning light, I felt sure I could pick out individual teeth marks on the flesh of my arm. I looked frantically at the crumpled green garment in the corner and suddenly felt sure that it was the source of the bite. I ran downstairs to show my mom, who was just starting to get breakfast things together. She looked at the bite and declared it a rash. "Probably from your new sweater," she said, and I could hear real sadness in her voice. She still believed that I really liked that ghastly thing, and the thought that it had caused me pain made her sad. She said she would wash it today after school and have it back to me by tomorrow, and I remember hoping that it shrank in the wash. I thought all day about the terrible garment coming back too small or shredded by some fluke, and the idea brought me some little amount of joy throughout the day. When I got home, however, I heard the washing machine in full swing and found a note on the table saying that Mom had gone to get groceries. I figured she put the sweater in with the load and went upstairs to start my homework. Mark and Davy wanted to ride bikes later, and I knew that if I got my math done before dinner, I'd be able to go riding with them before the sun went down. When I opened the door, I was startled by the green sweater sitting on the chair where I had left it last night. I was angry at myself for a moment. Why was I so afraid of this stupid sweater? I grabbed it up, yarn digging into my hands like steel wool, and took it to the laundry room. I opened the washer and threw it inside, slamming the lid closed and stomping back upstairs to start my homework. I finished quickly, and when Mom got home, I went outside to play. I spent the afternoon riding bikes and jumping dirt ramps with my friends, and as the streetlights came on, I turned for home. When it came time for bed, I walked back up to my room to find the sweater back on the chair where it had been earlier. There was a stack of freshly folded clothes on my dresser, but for some reason, Mom had put the sweater back on the chair. I walked around the sweater as I got ready for bed, but I kept thinking I could see it move out of the corner of my eye. It didn't leave the chair, but I thought I saw the arms wiggle or the waistband shiver slightly as I walked around the room. I went straight to bed after lights out, and in the morning, I found more bites on my arm. 3 new bites to be exact, each one on the underside of my arm, not on the outer arm where everyone might notice them easily, and each one looking much the same as the first. The sweater wasn't in bed with me this time, but I knew it had been the one to do it. Mom still thought it was a rash, but I was convinced that they were bites. For the next few weeks, I tried various measures to keep the sweater away from me. I left it in other rooms, sometimes with the door locked, but it always found its way back to my room. The closet was no obstacle at all for it, and twice I awoke to see it sitting in the chair as the door slowly closed behind it. One night, I stuffed it in the washing machine and closed the door locking behind it, and I still woke up the next morning to find it in my bed. My sleep started to suffer, and I found it hard to get a full night's sleep as I woke up to search for the sweater. My teacher told my mother that my performance was suffering, and I was given DRs several times for sleeping in class. If they'd seen what was under my sleeves, they would have probably had some questions for my mother, too. The bites were numerous, red and oozing blood sometimes. I kept them closely guarded, because if my teacher found out, I felt like my mother could be in big trouble. I kept them from both my teacher and my mother, not wanting her to ask questions either, and as it went on, our relationship became strained. She knew I wasn't sleeping well, but she wouldn't even entertain the idea that it was due to some evil sweater. She thought I was looking for attention, that I was just a typical child with an overactive imagination, but she couldn't take off work just to sit at home with me and protect me from a piece of clothing. At one point, she even threw the sweater in the garbage, thinking that would solve everything, but when it reappeared in my bedroom, she accused me of keeping it around to get attention. After 2 weeks of being terrorized, I decided to finally put a stop to it. That night, I stayed awake and watched it. The next day was Saturday, and I knew Mom wouldn't care if I slept in. I was going to catch it in the act and show Mom that it was hurting me. Maybe then she would let me get rid of it. I had a big metal flashlight with a thick blanket I was going to catch it in. I would hold on to it until it ran out of steam, and then show my Mom so she wouldn't think I was dreaming. I watched the red numbers on my Ninja Turtles alarm clock tick slowly by, and by 11:30, I was having trouble staying awake. The sweater hadn't done anything but sit there all night, and as my eyes got heavier and heavier, I found myself slipping towards sleep. I lost the fight before midnight, and woke up with my head against the blanket. I looked at the clock and saw that the numbers read 2:45 a.m. I swept the light around the chair and tried to orient myself. The beam fell on an empty chair, and I couldn't help but feel dread mounting. Where had it gone? Had it slipped off the chair while I was asleep? As I searched for it in the beam of light, though, I heard a familiar sound of wire scraping against the wood behind me. I turned the beam onto my headboard, and there was the sweater. I thought for a moment that I might be dreaming, but as the flashlight illuminated it, I had to come to grips with the idea that what I was seeing was very real. The bug-eyed pattern had become a real set of bulbous eyes. The green body was a voluminous mass of fibers and filaments, and the teeth had become large and snapping. It was perched on my headboard, clearly startled by the sudden intrusion of light. It emitted a loud, otherworldly scream as it leapt at my face, and I swung the flashlight without thinking. It smacked into it with a soft woof sound, and I watched it fall to the floor next to the closet. The beam fell on it again, and it scrambled across the floor as it frantically crawled for the bed. I sat on the bed and listened as it rustled beneath the box spring. I had glimpsed its true form now. I had seen the wicked teeth that had left marks on my arm, and I was not about to let it sink them into me again. I jumped out of bed, flipping on the lights, and scooped up the sweater as I headed down the hall. The hall closet was stuffed with old tubs for storage. As I wrenched open the door, I found what I was looking for on the second shelf. Mom had an old popcorn tin, the kind you give people for Christmas when you're not sure what else to give them. As I reached for it, I felt the sweater shriek and scramble towards me. It knew what I meant to do, and it knew that it would be stuck if I did. I grabbed it before it could latch onto me and stuffed it down into the metal guts of the tin. I was going to trap it in here for good, a good long time, and there wasn't a thing that it could do about it. In the light, it was just an ordinary sweater. I made use of this knowledge and stuffed it into the tin. I heard it thrashing around in the tin and held the lid closed as I looked around for duct tape or something else to keep the lid closed. A few layers of tape over the lid, and I felt confident that it wouldn't be able to escape. I stacked a few boxes on top of it for good measure and left it thrashing at the bottom of the closet. As I went to sleep, I could still hear it beating feebly at its prison walls. The noise was like a lullaby for my tired soul. I'd like to say that this is the end of the ordeal, but this story is actually my reason for writing it all. It's been 25 years since that night, and I had all but forgotten about it. I had put it off as the overactive imagination of a child, just like my mother had, until I came home from work today. After college, I moved several states away, taking a job as an architect for a big firm in Chicago. That's where I met Emily, and now we have a child of our own, my daughter Carrie. My mother loves her granddaughter and comes to see her whenever she can, but most of the time, my mother's presence is felt through her packages. Cookies, toys, anything to make my daughter smile. And when I got home today, I found one of those packages open on the kitchen table. The box was empty, but there was a note inside addressed to Carrie. "Hi, Carrie. Grandma was cleaning out the attic and found something she thought you might like. It was your dad's when he was your age, and he used to make up all sorts of strange stories about it. It looked so lonely when I found it. I thought you might have more use for it than me in the Windy City. Love you, Grandma." As I looked at the note, my blood ran cold. What had my mother found tucked away in the attic? I walked out of the kitchen and into the living room, catching sight of my daughter as she lay on the living room floor. She was coloring something in her binder, using her crayons to fill in whatever picture she had just drawn. At that moment, though, my focus was on the familiar green sweater she was wearing. The yarn was a little faded, but the bug eyes still stared at me, and the teeth smiled with that delirious mirth. As I stared, it seemed to say, "Hello, old friend. Thought you'd gotten rid of me, huh? But here I am. Time for our game to start again. Carrie turned around and smiled at me, springing up and wrapping her arms around me in a big hug. I had to stop myself from shuddering as the sweater touched me, and she stepped back a little so I could see when she was done. She did a little twirl so I could take in the whole thing, and it didn't seem to repulse her the way it had always repulsed me. "Isn't it great, Daddy? Grandma sent me this cool new sweater. I love it. It's so soft, and it's so warm." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded dumbly and walked back into the kitchen to fix myself a drink. After the second drink, I began to calm down a little, and I started writing this after my hands stopped shaking. I don't have a clue what to do. How do you tell your daughter that she's wearing something that tormented you for 2 weeks? How do you convey to her that something she loves is evil? What do I do when the bites start appearing? How do I rid myself once and for all of this evil sweater? It should have been the least stressful part of his day, but it was something that Steve would never quite get over. The kids had been bugging him to take them to the fair all week, but Steve would have rather taken off his skin with a cheese grater. He'd been working all week, his legs were killing him, and that wasn't the biggest issue at play either. The thought of bumping elbows and shoulders with people in a setting like that made him feel squeamy just thinking about it, though Steve would never admit to it. Steve had been plagued with haphophobia since he was young. It had been worse when he was younger. Steve hadn't even wanted his parents to touch him, but the thought of strangers touching him would send him into a near catatonic state. He spent years telling people not to touch him, avoiding hugs and handshakes, and stepping around people if they got too close. This set him apart from his peers and made him a bit of an outsider. After years of work and a lot of therapy, he'd gotten past some of it, but he still really didn't like to be touched by people he didn't know. Seeing his kids upset was hard, but Steve just couldn't bring himself to plunge into that kind of environment. Not until his wife had guilted him about it. "I think you ought to take the kids to the fair, Steve." He'd been half asleep, but snorted awake as he rolled over to look at her. The two were in bed, Lisa having gotten off a little earlier than usual, and they were looking forward to a much-needed night of sleep. Steve had nodded, ready to slip off into oblivion, when Lisa had spoken up. "Huh?" Steve asked, as articulate as ever. "You should take them to the fair. It means a lot to them. I'd do it myself if I didn't have to work until 11 on Saturday." "I'm just..." Steve grasped for an excuse that would make her let him sleep and drop the conversation. "So tired from work. The boss has been working us hard, and I don't really think I have the energy to putter around the fair." She rolled over, wrapping her arms around him as he leaned back against her. Lisa would never know how much work it had taken to get to this point, and he never intended to let her find out. He had never told her about his mental issues. He was afraid that she would see him as weak or an oddball and might leave him because of it. He doubted it. They had been married for years, but it was always something in the back of his mind. I know it's been a long week for you, but it would make your kids happy. Please, for me." Steve wanted to tell her no, but it was hard to say no when she was pressed up against him. There weren't many people Steve could stand to have this close. The list was very short. Lisa, the kids, and maybe his mother. He wanted to make her happy, wanted to make the kids happy, so, despite his better judgment, he agreed to take them. So, just before sunset on Saturday night, Steve found the three of them standing at the ticket booth just outside the teeming throng of people that made up the town fair. Even now, he could feel the presence of the crowd. It teemed with life, the sweating masses that would push at him, their skin rubbing at him as he and his kids walked by. The odor was nauseating, even from here, and Steve could feel his skin crawl as he paid the ticket taker with shaky hands. As they headed through the rusty chain link surrounding the fairground with his oldest, Robbie, and his youngest, Charles, Steve knew this would be the biggest test of his mental health in some time. From the instant he stepped inside, he could feel the combined weight of the crowd pressing against him. No one actually touched him. They were a little too polite for that. But the oppressive nature of so many people moving around him was still a lot. The The combined smell of sugary fair food, stale sweat, cigarette smoke, and the puff of dry earth from the fairground was like a cloud around him. The warmth of so many people so close to him and his kids reminded him of being too warm in his winter clothes. It was stifling, the miasma of emotions at odds with the smiling faces of his kids, and Steve tried to keep it together as his skin threatened to crawl right off his body. At first, Steve believed he could distract himself from all this. The food smelled good, but it was hard to keep it down with the combined smells of humanity wafting around him. Fried this and battered that went into his stomach, but even the culinary oddities couldn't keep his anxiety at bay. People sat too close to him, their heat radiating into his skin, and Steve began to feel claustrophobic as the crowd pressed against him outside the food tent. Due to COVID protocol, the fair had to ask guests to only eat in designated areas, but that didn't seem to be stopping most of them from walking around with small buffets in their arms. As he came out of the tent like a man who's seen a ghost, Steve thought maybe the rides would be a better distraction. The rides looked fun, but the seats were so close that it was hard to quantify as a distraction. Every ride pushed him closer to his fellow riders, and their skin on his was unbearable. No matter how close he pulled his arms in, no matter how small he made himself, he could still feel the warm, sweaty, disgusting feeling of the other riders beside him as their rubbery flesh pushed against his. He spent every ride feeling more and more like he wanted to crawl out of his own skin, and when Charles reached for his hand at the end of every ride, it took everything he had to grasp it. He felt ready to puke, ready to scream, and after a while he just let the kids ride the rides as he sat back and tried to keep control of himself. Rob and Charles had gone off to ride a collection of rides around the bench that he was sitting on, and as they moved, Steve moved as well. He was aware that they could get snatched pretty easily in this environment, but Rob was stocky for his age, and Steve hoped his size would dissuade anyone from messing with him or his little brother. As he sat on the metal bench, almost feeling the heat of every ass that had touched it before, he wanted to pull his knees up to his chest and feel the comfortable bump of his heart against his kneecaps. He hadn't done that since he was a kid, something that had driven his mother crazy, but he longed for that comfortable press now as the unnamed masses flooded around him. Steve would have never believed that there were so many people in this small town, but it appeared they were all on display tonight. The crowd was thick as they wove up the asphalt path, and Steve felt for his inhaler before realizing it was also something he hadn't used since high school. As the hyperventilation threatened to overtake him, a new player joined the game in the form of a loud groan in his guts. Steve wasn't sure if it had been the deep-fried Oreos or the batter-fried Twinkies, but they had put his stomach in an uproar. He could feel his guts bubbling, the rides clearly doing more harm than good in that respect. He made eye contact with Rob, cutting his eyes to the porta-potty and nodding his head towards it. Rob seemed to struggle with the implications for a moment, eyes darting between his dad and the little plastic shit box, before he finally put the pieces together and gave his dad a thumbs up. Steve was off the bench like a shot, his guts feeling like they were full of eels, and he locked the door as it clattered shut behind him. As he let his jeans hit the floor of the filthy bathroom, Steve felt a wave of calm roll through him. That might sound strange, feeling at ease in a disgusting toilet, but as his backside hit the plastic seat and the sound of the fair buzzed softly outside the rough walls, Steve found that the isolation was what he'd been seeking. Here it was just him and his thoughts, and he breathed a sigh of relief for the first time that night. As he did his business, he felt a sense of ease take the place of the anxiety he had felt for the last few hours. It felt like he might be able to return to the fair now, his burbling guts appeased as he purged the combination of fried foods. He heard his leavings splash below him, but didn't get up immediately. Steve wanted just a few more minutes, a few more seconds of quiet, and he would sometimes wonder if that had been his downfall. The universe, it seems, had found him greedy, and his punishment came a half a second before his eyes opened. He stiffened as he felt it, and could feel every hair on his body standing at attention. Something had touched him. It felt like a finger, just the pad of a single digit, but the feel was unmistakable as it caressed his inner thigh. Steve was frozen, his ease and peace gone as fast as the sour mash that had brought him here. This couldn't be real. Nothing was below him, nothing that could touch him at any rate. His anxiety was playing tricks on him, but if it was very convincing. He could feel it creeping up his thigh, going higher and higher. As it threatened to invade something too intimate for his mind to accept, Steve felt himself surge forward, falling onto the floor as his pants tripped his scrambling legs. In the murky light of the porta-potty, Steve saw something as it descended back into the muck of the tank. It was clearly a hand, the finger extended, and as he tried to press himself through the plastic portal to the noisy outside world, he saw it rise from the muck. It was a man, thin as a rail, who seemed to grow taller as he rose from the cesspool. His arms were cartoonishly long, their length dripping with noxious sludge. As he smiled, Steve saw teeth that looked too big for a normal mouth. The crap fell off him with thick plops, a sound that would haunt his dreams for years to come, and when he leaned down to loom over him, Steve felt sure that he would simply unhinge his jaw and swallow him up. Then he slid back into the repulsive stew like a reverse jack-in-the-box, and Steve felt the door open to release him into the barely lighted world. When Steve came scrambling out of the stall, his pants still around his ankles, he was screaming for help. There's something in there. There's something in the tank," he yelled, people gathering as he tried to get his pants up again. The police may have taken their time, but the fair workers had already quartered off the toilet. People watched the door, not wanting to let anyone get out, and the crowd that surrounded Steve was very supportive. He was sitting on the same bench he had run from, a blanket around him as he tried to ignore the well-meaning strangers who tried to comfort him. He'd told the crowd what had happened, blushing at the details as he relived them, and the police arrived about the same time the pumper truck did. His son sat beside him, comforting him as he sat shaking, and he was glad for the firmness of their hands this time. An officer took his statement as the men with the hose set to work. They were using a small pumper hose, not wanting to accidentally suck up whoever might be in there, and Steve couldn't help but watch the hose jiggle and jounce as they emptied the tank. The officers had just finished taking his statement, telling Steve they would get the guy, when the truck driver came up and spoke in a low voice to the officer. The officer rolled his eyes and nodded, flipping the notebook closed as he started to go. "Wait," Steve stammered, aren't you going to arrest the guy?" "Tank's empty, sir. There's no one in there." But, Steve started, his anxiety rising again. That's impossible. I saw it. I saw it with my own eyes." "Be that as it may, tank's empty, sir. It's a crime to misuse law enforcement, sir. I'd suggest you let me get back to work." As they left, so too left the crowd, many of them now whispering darkly as Steve and his sons were left sitting on the bench. They had left then, the fair mostly over by this point, but it seemed the mistrust came with them. If you didn't want to take us, you should have just said so instead of doing something like that." They'd been driving home when Rob said it, and when Steve looked in the rearview mirror, his son appeared on the verge of rage tears. "I didn't make it up," Steve said, wanting to take offense of his son's tone, but understanding his embarrassment. "I know what I saw." Charles was silent, his embarrassment harder for his 6-year-old mind to put into words, but Rob seemed to have a pretty good grasp on his anger. "Yeah, right," he said, looking out the window sullenly. The drive home seemed to take forever, but it still wasn't long enough for Steve to find a rebuttal. His sons piled out when they got home, and Steve could only watch as they went inside and slammed the door behind them. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to rail against his oldest for the way he'd talked to him, but as the anxiety and the shame built up inside him, all he could do was lean his head against the steering wheel and sob silently into the unyielding rubber. He felt violated, doubly so after the judging whispers of the crowd, and he knew the shame wouldn't wash off in the shower. The isolation he felt now brought none of the comfort it had earlier, and as Steve tried to make sense of what he felt, he knew it wouldn't make any difference. He just sat in the driveway, crying into his steering wheel, his impotence almost worse than the fear of being touched. The stranger who had touched him tonight would remain a stranger, and that fact was the worst part of all to Steve.